Oops, sorry. Wrong way around. I'm upside down.
We're upside down.
Okay, this looks okay. All right, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us to learn some Parsha together tonight. Thank you to Ivor, who's my trusted in-person Shir listener. Thank you to all of you who joined us on Zoom. Thank you to those of you who joined us on Facebook Live. And thank you to those joining us on Torah Anytime. If you go to Torah Anytime, you can check out a whole bunch of amazing shurim by lots of good speakers. And there's tremendous content in there for anybody and everybody. Okay, I'd like to start tonight with the following idea. We have an interesting medrash. The medrash says the following. Avram Avinu had 3 people that he had made a covenant with. They were called Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre. Those are the 3 names of these people. Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre. We read about them in last week's Sedra. And Avram Avinu was told in last week's Sedra that we would like you, God tells him, I would like you to have a bris, circumcise yourself. And Avram Avinu goes, the Medrash tells us, he goes to his 3 people, his trusted friends, Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre, and he says, I'd like to know what you think about this bris. Should I or shouldn't I do it? So he asks Oner, should I have the bris? And Oner says, bit of a dangerous thing to do. To which he says, why? Why is it so dangerous to have a bris? He says, well, you should know that you have a whole bunch of kings that you defeat in the war that we spoke about last year, and they're probably waiting to avenge themselves. The families are waiting to avenge the death of their families, and therefore, if you're going to have a bris and things are going to be looking very difficult for you, you're going to be feeling very sick, ill on the 3rd day, they will come and they'll attack you. And so therefore, I recommend no bris. That's what Oner says. And Avram goes, okay, fine, take that on board. Next he goes to Eshkol. And he says to Eshkol, should I have a bris or should I not have a bris? He goes, well, you're already an elderly man. He says, yeah, but I'm still thinking about having a bris. To which Eshkol says, okay, I mean, if you have a bris, maybe you should have the bris privately. Don't let anybody know about it. Don't make a big fuss about it. We can make a big fuss about it. People find out about it, and that's not so good. It's dangerous, etc. No, don't have a bris in public. And then he goes to Mamre, and he asks Mamre the question. He says, Mamre, should I have a bris or not, and should I make this a public affair or not? And Mamre says, of course you should have a bris, and of course it should be a public affair, and you should be proud of what you're doing, and do it outright, and let everybody know, and let everybody see what you're doing. That is the medrash that is quoted by the Oznaim LaTorah, Reb Zalman Sorotzky, and he quotes the following medrash. And the question that he asks is, Avram Avinu went through all these tests. Avram Avinu had been now sent away from his home. He didn't go ask anyone advice if he needs to, what do you think? God has just told me to leave my home. Do you think it's a good idea for me to leave my home? Or do you think I should stay here? Don't read anywhere that he's asking any questions. He's gone to war against these 4 kings. We'll read at a later stage that Avram Avinu is even willing to sacrifice his own son. So if Avram Avinu is willing to do all of that without asking anyone any advice whatsoever, how is it or why is it that suddenly in this instance of the bris that Avram Avinu feels compelled to ask these 3 people, Oner, Eshkol, Mamre, their opinion? What does their opinion make any difference? Why are we asking them? Right? That is, that is the question that is asked by that's the question that the Oznaim LaTorah asks. How could it be that Avram Avinu suddenly asked this question? And more than that, and if they all would have said no, does that mean Avram Avinu would have decided, well, all right, well, they've all said no, and therefore if they all said no, then I'm just not going to have the bris? Is that what he was planning? That's what he was going to do? How do we understand this? So the Oznaim LaTorah says a beautiful idea, and I think a very important idea. And that's the following. Avram Avinu was willing to have the bris. He was willing to go through with it. There was no issues as far as Avram Avinu was concerned. God told him to do it. Of course he was going to do it. There was no question. However, and this is an important lesson, Avraham Avinu was still worried. He says, I'm not the only person that is going to be affected now if I do this bris. If I have a bris and I take all the people, all my men, and I give them a bris as well, then our entire camp, all of us, will be feeling quite weak and defenseless. And if all of us are feeling quite weak and defenseless, you know what? You know who else this is going to have an effect on? 3 individuals we mentioned before. Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre. Because Avraham Avinu lived with them, and if Avraham Avinu, they made a bris, they made a covenant. Avraham Avinu says, I'm going to protect you, I'll be with you, you guys help me, I'll help you. And suddenly he becomes defenseless. He becomes someone that cannot be relied upon anymore to help others and to protect others. And now you have the question. Avraham Avinu therefore turns to the people that he made the covenant with, and he says, listen, as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to make this, to have this circumcision. I'm not asking you permission, but I want you to know if I do this, this might have an adverse effect on you. And if it has an adverse effect on you, I fully understand, and I fully understand that I have now reneged on my responsibility to you. And therefore, because I have reneged on my responsibility to you, therefore, you're allowed to walk away from this covenant. Yes, we had a covenant. Yes, we had a deal. But I'm not keeping my side of the deal. And if I don't keep my side of the deal, then you don't have to keep your side of the deal. And so Avraham Avinu goes to Oner and he says to Oner, listen, I'm having this bris. How do you feel about it? I don't want to put you in a difficult position. I know what position I'm in, but what about you? How do you feel about this? And Oner says, not great. Why? Well, I'm worried. If you're down and all your men are down, then what's going to happen? We're going to be in big trouble. Oh, okay. Then he goes to Eshkol and says to Eshkol, what about you? How do you feel about this bris? And Eshkol says to him again, he says, look, you might want to do it. If you want to do it quietly. Don't let everyone know about this, because if everybody knows about this, you're creating a tremendous amount of danger to us and to my families and to everybody else around us. So you want to do it? Shh, quietly. Don't let anybody know. People will hear afterwards. It'll be too late. Already you'll be back to your strength. They'll be fine. Mamre says no. Mamre says do it, and do it publicly, and go through with it, and don't worry about it, and you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And make a big balagan out of it. Make a big loud noise. And that's what Avraham Avinu does. He listens to what Mamre says. And therefore God is willing to show himself be'elone Mamre. The pasuk starts this week, said, Vayera Hashem ela be'elone Mamre. God appears to him in the plains of Mamre. Why in the plains of Mamre? So Rashi tells us he's the one that gave him an Eitzah Alamila. He's the one that gave him advice about the Bris Milah. What's the advice that he got from him? Why did he need advice? Was he asking advice for the Bris Milah? God said, have a Bris Milah, just have the Bris Milah. What's he going to ask other people advice for? The answer is because Mamre says to him, I don't care. My covenant with you remains. Our deal is a deal. And if you want to have a bris, because God said have a bris, then go ahead and have a bris. That's fine. I trust you and I trust Hashem that everything will be okay. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why Mamre deserves this reward. But what I think when you look at this is that there's a beautiful idea within it. And an important idea. And that is your religious behavior affecting others? That's a really big question to ask yourself. Is your religious behavior affecting others, and specifically affecting others adversely? Because if it is, who says that's okay? The famous story of, I think, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he was invited somewhere, and everybody knew Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was the man who championed the Mussar movement. He would do everything stringently, would do everything properly, and then he sat down to eat bread, and he took out a little cup, and he washed his hands, just barely enough water on one hand, barely enough water on the other hand, just washed his hands just very, very simply. And somebody came over to him and he said, excuse me, you're the great Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. We would expect you to fill the cup and pour a whole cup on one hand and fill another cup and pour a whole cup on the other hand. Why are you being so sparing with the water? And Rabbi Yisrael Salanta pointed and he said, "Do you see this person over there? This old man or this old woman, whoever it is the water carrier." In those days, they didn't have pipes that brought fresh water as much as you want into your house. That's the water carrier. So every time I fill up this cup and I'm machmir to go ahead and to have the extra super duper shear to pour water over my hands, means this poor individual needs to go schlepping water now. And who says I should be machmir for them to schlep water? How can I be machmir when it's costing them? That would be wrong. And it means we as individuals, I think this is something that I've had so much conversation with people over the last few weeks about this whole thing about wearing masks and not wearing masks, and shul being open and shuls not being open, and people davening and people going, and the masks do help and they don't help, and it's important and it's not important. I'm sure, I don't know how many of you have had these conversations with different individuals, but I've had lots of conversations with lots of different individuals. And I think what you have to realize over here is, if your religious behavior is going to adversely affect somebody else, you need to think twice about what you're doing. Now, Avraham Avinu, as we saw before, it wasn't a question of whether Avraham Avinu was going to do the bris or not, but how was he going to do it? It might not be a question of whether you daven or not, but it's a question, how are you going to daven? Where are you going to daven? What precautions are you going to take when you daven? I heard a story recently. I hope this story is not true, but this is a story that they tell. There was an individual that came into a shul in a town, I don't remember what town this was in. And he was very careful about corona. And he came into a shul where nobody was really very careful about corona. And he's looking around, he's there with his mask, he's looking at a whole crowd of people without masks, and he's feeling extremely uncomfortable next to all these people without masks, because he just feels, I'm not protected. And in the back he sees an old man with a mask, and he goes, there's the guy I'm going to sit next to. That makes it easier. I have a mask, he has a mask, two birds of a feather. We'll stick together. So he sits down next to that fellow and he davens the whole davening next to that fellow. And the fellow says to him, the fellow from that shul, who's wearing the mask, turns to him and he says, I see you're also wearing a mask. He goes, yeah, I'm also wearing a mask. He goes, do you also have corona just like I do? And the guy literally almost fell off his chair. He sat down next to that guy because he thought he was the safest person. That guy is sitting there with corona thinking, if I put on a mask, I can send out a corona with corona in a shul. That's not right. It's not okay. You know, you go shopping. I remember having this conversation with people and saying to them, yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, you're right. It's not as geschmack to daven with a mask as it is to daven without a mask. But think about the opposite. You could have somebody sitting next to you that's vulnerable, and you could get corona and pass it on to that other individual. Now, you'll go home, and maybe for 2 weeks, for 2 days or 3 days, you won't feel well. I have a friend of mine who sent me a message 2 days ago. The message read, positive, 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 positive. 5 people in his family tested positive. Him, his wife, and 3 children. Okay, so they're all quarantined. I spoke to him today. His wife's already almost better. He's feeling almost better. His daughters who have it, they don't have any sense of smell, but they're all feeling better. And fine, 2-3 days later, they'll be better. But there could be an elderly individual or somebody who is a vulnerable individual sitting next to you who gets it off you, who won't be able to shake it as easily. They could die. And even if they don't die, they could have long-term effects from it. So when you're doing your religious work, you need to think about other people and how it affects them as well. Don't just say, I sit here in my space and I daven here. What happens in this space next to them, whatever. I don't think about that. That's the guy who's drilling the hole inside the boat. Have you ever heard of the guy who's drilling the hole? The guy's drilling the hole by his seat. So people say, what are you doing? You're making a hole in the boat. He goes, I'm not making a hole in the boat. I'm making a hole by my seat. I never made a hole by your seat. Yeah, but if there's a hole in my seat, then the whole boat sinks. And Avraham Avinu, we see over here, Avraham Avinu, before he did this bris, Not there was a question about whether he was going to do the bris or not. But the people that's going to affect around him, he went to say to them, listen, this could have an effect on you. I don't want this to have an adverse effect on you. So what can I do for you to make sure that I can do my thing and you won't be affected? That's what Avraham Avinu teaches us over here. Not to say, oh, well, it might affect somebody else, therefore I won't do it. If it affects somebody else, that doesn't mean don't daven. It means think about how you're going to daven. If it affects somebody else, doesn't mean don't learn or don't have a bris. Have it. But think about the other person you're going to affect as well. And that's the beauty over here. That's what Avraham Avinu, that's what this medrash means. And I thought there's a very, very beautiful, interesting idea to start off with. Thinking about other people. When you're doing your religious service, you need to think about other people and how it's going to affect them as well. And make sure that you do whatever you want to do, but it doesn't affect adversely anybody else. Okay, that's the first idea for tonight. Idea number 2. Avraham Avinu is sitting there and God has just come to visit him. And he's seeing how he's doing. And at one point or another, Vayera, and he sees he sees 3 men that are standing there, Vayera, and he sees Vayera, he runs towards them from the gate of his tent, and he bows down to them and he says, and the 2 ways, Rashi says there's 2 ways to understand this. Either he said to the 4 individuals, my masters, please don't go away. Or he said to God, God, hold on, I got something important to do. Just hold your horses. You got time, right? Okay, fine, I'll be back soon. My father often, when he calls, he's like, is now a good time? You're always busy. I'm like, no, now's a good time. He goes, okay, so let's talk. And then he speaks to me. Because sometimes he calls and I'm on my way into giving a class, or I'm on my way into Chavrusa, I'm on my way to taking my kids to school, whatever, and he calls and I only have 3 minutes and I say, Daddy, I'd love to speak to you. Just this moment, it's not going to work. But guess what? God's got plenty of time. And so Avraham Avinu says, please wait for me. I'll be back soon. And he goes and he takes care of these individuals. And you see Avraham Avinu bows down to them, as you see, and he brings them water and he treats them so wonderfully. When they were really 3 idol worshippers, or he thought as much, that he didn't realize they were malachim, that they were angels. He thought they were 3 idol worshippers that had come upon him. So if there were 3 idol worshippers that chanced upon him, why is he treating them with such respect, with such reverence? He doesn't need to treat them like that. All he should say is, listen, come on in, have a drink, I'm getting back to God. And the Gemara says, Mikan, from here we learn that Gdola Hachnasas Archim, bringing in guests, is greater mikabalas pnei Ashchina. It's greater than having an audience with Hashem himself. Because Avraham Avinu is in the middle of an audience with Hashem himself, and what does he do? He says, God, hey, hold up, okay, I'll be back soon. And he goes, takes care of those people, and only then does he come back to God. So how do we understand that? What does that mean? Why is it like that? Why is it more important to help those people than it is for us to respect God or to have this meeting with God? How did Avraham Avinu know that was the case? True, but how did he know that this is even greater than meeting up with God? This is the way he grew up with people. So the answer that Rav Schwab gives in the beginning of this week's Seder, a very beautiful answer, and I think a very important answer as well. It's all about perspective. Okay? Let me give you the 2 perspectives. Let me give you an example of 2 perspectives. And then we'll move then on to guests. There are some people, when somebody comes to them to collect money, that take the following perspective. What a schnorr. What an idiot who lives in Israel and doesn't do anything and doesn't want to earn a livelihood. And he comes here to my city of Manchester and he goes from door to door knocking on in his dirty suit and his hat. That's why one set of people look at it. Other people look at it and say, look, God has given you an opportunity. God has given you an opportunity to do a mitzvah. It's amazing. I think about it when I was a child. My mother used to tell this story. There's not a story that I remember so much, but mothers always remember certain stories about their kids with great pride. So my mother used to tell this story that we once had a fellow that knocked on by us, a poor individual from Israel. And he knocks on, and my father gave him some money, and he looks at me and says, "Do you know anywhere else where Jews live?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. Right across the road. My father's sister lives there." He's like, "Really? Could you take me there?" "Sure, I'll take you." I'm 4 or 5 years old. Yeah, I didn't realize she didn't want this guy over. Yeah, she takes the tzedakah thing works differently for her than it works for my father. Anyway, so I ring on, and then she goes, "Hello, is it? It's your nephew David. Okay, well, come on up." And up I go the steps, and I ring on, and she opens up the door, and there I am with the schnorrer. Okay, and she has one look at me, and she's like, "Huh?" And my mother says, again, I don't remember this story, but my mother says, I looked at my auntie and I said, "Look, I brought you a mitzvah." That's what happened. Yeah? Wow. I wish I could do that nowadays. I think nowadays if I try that one, Clive, don't try this one at home. Like of these shows and they have like a sign on the bottom, "Do not try this at home." This is one of those "do not try this at home" kind of things. But I was a young kid at the time. So when you're 4 or 5 years old or 6 years old and you bring over somebody collecting and you look at an adult and you say, "Look, I brought you a mitzvah," what's the adult going to say? Some mitzvah. What are you going to say? So what do you say? "Thank you very much. Here's some money," and that's it. But the truth is, you look at it and you go, "Oh, what a cute story," little innocent Eisenberg when he was small and wasn't clever and he didn't realize what he was doing. So he went to his auntie and he brought over a schnorrer and he said it was a mitzvah. How cute. The honest truth is that when you're 5 years old and you say, "Look, I brought over a mitzvah," that's the truth. That is the truth. And when you look at the guy and you say, "What a stupid, smelly schnorrer," that's your arrogance. Because the truth is, when somebody comes and knocks on your door, you've been given a golden opportunity to give tzedakah. I'm not saying you have to give everybody 180 pounds. Okay, fine, I understand that. But treat the guy nicely. Give him a smile. Give them some money. Sometimes it's hard. I find it very difficult, when you give them money and they say that's not enough. I get it. It's not nice to hear that from people. I don't like it either when people say that. And whenever I've gone around collecting for any case, people say to me, "You know what? I don't have a lot to give you. This is what I can afford." I said, "Whatever you give me, I'll take with a smile." And I always take whatever you give me with a smile. Because it's better than nothing. But somebody has come and has knocked on your door. If you look at it with the attitude like, "Wow, here is a guy who's coming to bring me a mitzvah. If he hadn't knocked on my door, then I had one mitzvah less. I would have had," so you say, "Oh, big deal, I've had another pound in my pocket." Oh, big deal about the pound. Here's a guy knocked on your door and he's offering you eternity and all it costs is 50p or a pound. Imagine that. He walks and he says, "I'm offering you eternity, all it costs you is 50p. Want to buy into it?" "No." "Well, why not?" "Of course you want to buy into it. You can buy into it for a pound, buy into it for 5 pounds or 10 pounds. That's up to you already to decide how much money you want to put into it. But you're buying into this, you're buying into a mitzvah. You are buying into a mitzvah. It's not a 3-year-old's sort of, what would we call it? In Hebrew, you say it's tmimus. Being very, very sort of, what's the word now? I almost had it. Clive, what's the word for it?
Well, the expression is out of the mouths of babes and suckling.
Absolutely.
Comes truth.
Yeah, well, out of the mouths of babes, it's true. But the people look at you and they go, "Oh, look how, this guy's so sheltered. He doesn't understand it. He's like, it's very, very cute, very sweet." No, it's not cute and sweet. It's true. It actually is true. When somebody knocks on your door, he's given you a tremendous opportunity. And the same is true, by the way, for guests. Lots of people have guests in their house. But the guests that they have are only the important people. It's their best friends and they love having their best friends over. Or the important people in town that they can have over and they can talk about business and they can talk about all sorts of other things. it's not anywhere near as popular having over the nebuchs. But you know who needs the invitation more than your friends? Your friends have somewhere to eat. They don't need your food. But there are people that need your food. And even if they don't need your food, they need your company. And they need to be acknowledged. And they need to be given some love. And they need to be shown you also count. You're also important. You're not a nobody. Just because you're not married, or just because you're divorced, or just because your kids don't talk to you, or just because you're poor, or just because people don't like the ideas that you spout forward, or just because you come from another country, doesn't make you unimportant. Doesn't mean we shouldn't respect you or we shouldn't invite you. And there are certain people, that excel at this mitzvah. They excel at inviting guests and making those guests feel comfortable. You know, I knew people, my mother used to tell me about certain people in Vienna. My parents used to have lots and lots of guests like that. But my mother told me about a friend of hers in Vienna who is, you know, they're very, very nice people, but can be tough if she needs to be. And she had somebody around her table. She had a few people around her table. Not all of them were the most, regular people. Some a little bit more nebuchdik, what should I tell you? And then one of the more, whether you call them enlightened, or one of the people around her table that had more money or had more status or whatever else it is, made a comment about somebody who was less put together. Whatever the comment was. I don't even remember the story. I'd have to ask my mother. And this woman looked at that fellow and she said to him, and good on her that she did that, she said, every single one of my guests is special. And you daren't treat any of my guests any worse than you treat me. How dare you speak to a man like that? How dare you be derisive to him about the way he behaves, or the way he eats, or the work that he does? It's none of your business. We're all guests around my table. And if you don't like it, get up and you can leave. That's what she said to the macher. Because just because you're a macher doesn't mean you can treat people who are not machers like nothing. Or just because you're important in town doesn't mean you have a right to treat anybody else badly. You have no right to do that. And so there's the difference between looking as guests as, oh, these are people that are an adornment to my Shabbos table. My Shabbos table is empty without guests. And I love having guests, and specifically guests that need to be invited. And seeing every person that shows up as a guest as God-sent mitzvah. You are a God-sent mitzvah. So you say, well, no, but he doesn't dress so nicely, or he's not the most regular person, or maybe the conversation around him sometimes a little bit awkward. That's what makes it the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not inviting all your friends. Yes, it's nice to invite all your friends, but where's achnosas orchim in that? I'm such a big machnas orchim. I always invite my best friends, and they bring the best whiskeys over, and they bring over a nice bunch of flowers, and we sit for 5 hours together and talk because we have so much in common. It's nice, but that's not what achnosas orchim is all about. That's not what bringing in guests is all about. You want to bring in guests, bring in the people that really need it. And see them as your mitzvah. And when you look at those people as an opportunity from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem has given you blessings by sending you this individual. That's beautiful. That's not being naive. That's being realistic. And Avraham Avinu has this. Avraham Avinu looks at his guests and he says, you know what? Hashem sent me these wonderful guests. Why? Because he wants me to take care of them. Yeah, but Avram, they're not Jewish. So? But they're idol worshippers. So? Are they not sent to me by God? Did he not send these people to me because they need my help? He did. Well, let me go on and help them. Because I see them as messengers from God for me to do something for them and to give them something positive. And so Avraham Avinu sees these 3 people walking past, and he goes running to them because he says, I know that these people, they are people that have been sent to me by God. And this is why he knows, he says to God, God, hold on a minute, I'll be back soon. What do you mean, hold on a minute, I'll be back soon? How could you do that to God? The answer is, when you understand that God's the one that sent you those guests, God says, hey, Go take care of those people. No, I'm busy talking to you. No, don't talk to me now. The 3 people that need taken care of, he'll talk to me later. I got time to wait. What about those 3 people that I sent you that really need taken care of now? Get on to them. Come back to me. That's how Avraham Avinu knew they were supposed to go there. That's how Avraham Avinu realized that's what I had to do. The first thing I need to do is take care of those guests. I can come back to God later because those guests are God sent. They are God's messengers for me to be able to do a mitzvah with them. And I better not let them down. And so he goes and he bows down to them and he gives them all the food that they need and he gives them all the cover that they need because he sees them not as an intrusion on his life, but as God sent messengers for a mitzvah that he has to do. When you look at guests like that, and when you look at people who are collecting like that, and when you look at mitzvahs in general like that, you start to see things very, very differently. It's a very different light. It's a very different way of looking at things. And that's what Avraham Avinu teaches us. Start looking at people and seeing them. Obviously, don't look at them as objects. Oh, he's my mitzvah object. She's my mitzvah object. That's not what I mean. But to see them as opportunities, not as nebuchs. When you have the opportunity to give someone tzedakah, it's an opportunity. When you have the opportunity to invite somebody into your home and he might not be the most simple and straightforward character, that's the opportunity. That's where your opportunity is. That's where your mitzvah is. And that's where you see growth and that's where you see amazing things. Not with the easy, low-hanging fruit. That's easy. That's not the opportunity. So those are the 2 ideas I wanted to share with you tonight. I'm sorry we're going to end early. I have an event that I'm chairing at 9 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for those who joined us on Facebook Live, for those who joined us on Zoom, and to you who joined us on Torah anytime. If you want to get in touch, davideisenberg@gmail.com. Looking forward to hearing from you next week. Thank you, Michael.
Bye.